Well, hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. I am your host, Michele Irby Johnson, and thank you for joining me for Life Matters with Michele. You know, this is the platform where we get to talk about what matters to you in your life. And I'm so excited that you have decided to join me. Of course, we welcome you to drop your comments in the chat box so we can field them over to our special guest, who happens to be none other than Miss Thecia Jenkins. Welcome, my dear. Welcome, welcome. How are you?
I am well, thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful. I tell you, this is amazing. This is October. And for those who do not know, October is jam packed full of awareness things. You have autism awareness, you have HIV awareness, you have cancer awareness, but you also have domestic violence awareness. And so today we are going to be talking about domestic violence awareness on today. And my special guest, Miss Thecia, she's amazing. We met, you know, um, virtually we met, but I'm excited to hear what she has to share. So let me read her bio really quickly, and then we're going to jump right into our discussion about domestic violence today. Ms. Thecia Jenkins is the training director with the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council in Houston, Texas. Go Dallas. I'm sorry. She oversees curriculum development, community outreach, and training for law enforcement, healthcare providers, educators, corporate, clergy, social services, and communities to raise awareness about recognizing, responding, and referring victims of domestic violence to get assistance. That's very important. We'll talk about that. She is also an independent speaker and consultant working with nonprofits and small businesses internationally. Organizations hire Ms. Thecia for seminars on intimate partner violence, trauma informed care, emotional intelligence, communication and cultural competence. Oh my God, that's so good. She is a graduate of Texas Women's University and holds certifications in diversity, emotional intelligence, disc behavioral styles. I tell you that right there will tell you who you really are. Mediation and coaching. And her favorite quote is, "No significant learner occurs without leadership." And that is a quote by educator Miss Ruby Payne. Once again, I want to welcome my very, very, very special guest, Miss Thecia Jenkins. Whoop, whoop. Say hello, my friend.
Hello, 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 and thank you so much for connecting and providing this opportunity to come and have a conversation with you today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so this is one of those conversations that people just typically don't like to talk about. They either hide it, they either think it's not real, they think it's something private that doesn't need to be discussed outside of the home. But you and I both know that that is not the truth. And as a survivor of domestic violence myself, 22 years ago, I have learned down through the years the realities of it, the taboo, all of those things that are attached to it. And so let's get started and let's just give people a working definition. What is domestic violence?
Well, domestic violence is it happens in a relationship where one person seeks to gain power and control over another one through verbal and emotional abuse, sexual abuse, sometimes spiritual abuse, and physical. And I want people to hold on to the idea of power and control because so many times people tend to think it's about anger management. It
Right.
is not about anger management. Domestic violence is about power and control.
Absolutely, absolutely. When I teach my class, domestic violence crisis control counseling, I draw a house. And I tell them, I said, tell me what you think would be in the basement of this house. And so we talk about coercive control, we talk about threatening, intimidation, all of those different things. And then when they try to say physical, I said, well, that's not really the foundation. It doesn't start with them just hitting you. There are other things that lead into the actual physical. And some people never actually get hit. Some people just deal with the mental and the emotional and the verbal anguish that just it incarcerates them, if I can say that, in their life and in their relationships. And so when you're mentioning domestic violence, people also do not realize that children come into play, because sometimes, the perpetrator will use their own children. Sometimes they will use the pets. I've counseled people who've had, their pets, set on fire, or they have their fur plucked out or kicked across the room. So there are so many different things that come into play with the domestic violence. Now, there's a new term that they're using, Ms. Thecia, that I just have a problem with. But if you can go ahead and tell us what intimate partner violence is, if you can explain that to the people and tell what the difference is between domestic violence and intimate partner violence, because when there's the textbook that I use gives a different definition that doesn't sit well with me personally. But if you can tell us what that is.
So based on my knowledge, I've started shifting to saying intimate partner violence, and definitely you can add on. Intimate partner violence is the same to me as domestic violence. I know that when I am doing training with healthcare providers, is that's the terminology that is now being used, intimate partner violence versus domestic violence. And I also believe that when we're talking about intimate partner violence, that it is encompassing violence that happens in all relationships.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, and again, when I think about that, when they say the intimate partner violence can be between a parent and a child, it can be between a grandchild and a grandparent and all of that. And I understand it, but at the same time, I'm like, to me, it's not the same thing, because, we grew up on DV, domestic violence, and it meant someone you were in an intimate love relationship with.
Right.
And that person usurped authority or power and control over your life. And so when I hear the definition intimate partner violence, I said, I just can't. This is just me. This is not a fight of any sort, but because I asked my students, I said, tell me what you think is the difference. And so for me to say that me chastising or abusing my child is intimate violence, I can't wrap my head around it the way that I can wrap my head around domestic violence, because it's not a violation of my heart. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And so when I'm doing training or in any way providing any type of education, I'm very clear that intimate partner violence or domestic violence is between individuals that are married, not married, go together, used to go together. And of course, it transcends different types of relationships. However, when I'm talking about issues around child abuse, maybe grandparents and things of that nature, we call that family violence. And I'm just taking that from the legal definition, that the legal definition of family violence is inclusive of child abuse, abuse between siblings and things of that nature. But being very clear, whether it's domestic violence or intimate partner violence, this is someone that you have intimacy with. And I think that's also what makes this crime something that people don't want to talk about. And it makes it so hard for the victim to leave, because this is someone that you are intimate with. And we're not talking just about sex. We're talking about the sharing of dreams, or talking about people who are engaged with one another, who are in love with one another, or at least at some point were. So that's for me the difference.
A question from our audience says, what are causes of domestic violence?
The causes of domestic violence, what we know is, and I was just talking about this last night in another virtual event that I was doing, is it can be from the individual level. What we know is that domestic violence is actually a learned behavior. And so if you have a child who grew up in a home watching their mom or dad, but specifically their mom, I've had children tell me that they've watched their mom be sexually assaulted. They've watched their mom be strangled. Recently here in Houston, an 8-year-old witnessed his mom be literally beaten to death by his father with his steel-toed boots. And so here's what we have to wonder about that 8-year-old little boy. There's a possibility of him becoming an abuser or a victim, depending on the mindset. So at an individual level, we know that that's one of the causes, is that it is something that is normalized. And then at the relationship level, it's about our peers. And if we are surrounded by individuals who do not believe in mutual respect in relationships, because sometimes we'll hear, if a guy is really being nice quote unquote nice to his partner, his homies might say, you need to put her in check. You need to let her know who wear the pants up in here. You need to come correct on her. And so that guy who was raised to respect women, or who was raised to have mutual respect, he's listening to his partners in the background. And the same can be said for women. Yeah. The girl, you need to, train him. And so peers, so we have to watch who we are around. So that's another root cause. From a community level, it is the fact that as a society, we tend not to pay attention. We don't reinforce. Here in Texas, there's a law called the Teen Dating Violence Bill that was passed in September of 2009. And what it said is that every middle school and high school in Texas is supposed to provide training to the students and the faculty about the red flags. Well, if schools are not doing that, they are a root cause, because when that teen dating violence is happening in that school and they're not saying anything about it, that they are a cause. Because when you provide that education, those young people and the teachers now know what the red flags are, and they're able to reinforce the laws. And then at the level of society, the societal level, we live in a world where oppression is real. We live in a world where, unfortunately, regardless of race, that women are considered second-class citizens. Yes, even in 2020.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the root causes of domestic violence.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is so true, because I later found out that my abuser watched his mother get beat by her husband all the time. And I didn't know that at the time, but it came out, in court or whatever the case may be. And so it's very true that it is a learned behavior. And in some instances, I may be getting ahead of myself. Sometimes women learn helplessness, or, depending on their culture, depending on, their community, depending on their dependence upon the perpetrator, they sometimes will have, the learned helplessness, where they don't feel like they can get out because this is all they know. And, what else is there going to be for them to, in a better state. So let's go back to the high school, the bill that they passed about the teen dating violence. And is vitally important that we do let our youth know what to look for, because they don't realize that, the texting when they're, being told, where are you? Text me when you get there. All of those different things. Who's on your phone? Trolling your social media page. All of those things are red flags. I mean, what do you have to say about that?
Definitely. And people don't know the red flags. Like you said, the constant texting, I've had young women in classes that I've taught saying, well, that's how I know he loves me. He just wants to know where I am. And that's a red flag. It's a red flag if someone is constantly demeaning you, saying, why are you wearing that purple? Purple doesn't look good on you. Or what do you mean you're going back to school? No one's going to even let you get into their school. And if you do graduate, no one's going to hire you. So those tend to be red flags in a relationship. Something as simple as even when you're having a conversation and your partner maybe acts out of character, they may tend to raise their voice, or even the way that they look at you. And if you start to get that little flutter in your stomach, it's like, that wasn't quite right. All of those can be red flags. And, this can kind of take us into talking about the power and control wheel model, because that's usually what I am driving home to people, is saying, hey, if you can notice any one of these 8 characteristics in a relationship, your relationship may be abusive. And so that verbal and emotional abuse. So if you're in a relationship where someone is constantly putting you down, and here's the other key part of that, these are things that happen on a repetitive basis.
Yes.
Let's be clear. Let's be honest. And in all relationships, sometimes things just don't go right. But we're talking about when these things are happening on a repetitive basis. So if you're in a relationship where every time you turn around, you're being called stupid, you're being called the B word, you're being told you're too dark, you're too light, your hair is too straight, it's too nappy, you talk funny. And these are all things that I've heard from women and men over the last 24 years.
Yeah.
Isolation, if you are involved with someone who's not wanting you to go to church because I know you're having an affair with that pastor, or you're giving all our money to the church.
Yeah.
That's a form of isolation, because the whole goal is to get the victim to what? Stop going to church.
Right.
No, we're not going to go to your mom's house for Thanksgiving. They never have like me. The goal, what, is to take that person away from their family. And what? Because the abuser wants to be the only person in that person's life. So the verbal and emotional abuse, if you're being isolated in any way, intimidation. And when I talk about intimidation, it can be something as simple as when you're having a conversation with your partner and all of a sudden they just give you this look.
Mm-hmm. Or squeeze your leg on the table.
Exactly. So that's a sign, because those are not normal things in a relationship. Using children, if there's children involved in the relationship and your partner's constantly telling you that if you leave me, you're not going to get custody of the kids. I will make sure that everyone knows you're an unfit mother or unfit father. Are telling the children things about the parent. Well, your daddy ain't no good. He's a sorry such and such. Or, your mama's this and she's that. That's a red flag that relationship is abusive. Economic abuse. If you don't know the PIN number to your checking and savings account with your partner,
come on,
that's
now.
a red flag. If you are working and your partner is constantly showing up at your job or calling your job all day, that's a red flag, because what they're trying to do is to get you fired. And why do they want you fired? Because they want you economically dependent upon them. If they're sabotaging you going back to school, I worked with clients who were receiving TANF, temporary assistance in needy families. And part of that is that the person who's receiving that TANF has to be out job searching or getting an education. And I had one young lady who told me that her partner kept her up all night long, sexually assaulting her and arguing, because he knew the next morning she had her final exam to become a phlebotomist.
Wow.
And he did that. Why? Because he wanted her not to be able to pass that test. Because if she passed that test and became a phlebotomist, that became her key to leaving. So if you're in a relationship where your partner is not in agreement with you bettering yourself, if your partner is taking money away or things of that nature, all of those are red flags. And then coercion and threats. If you're in a relationship where it's not a good place for you, and you finally said to your partner, you know what, I don't think this is working out. And this could be a month in. And if they're telling you, well, you know what, if you want to leave me, that's fine. But I think I'm just going to kill myself because I can't live without you.
Yeah.
No one in my family loves me. No one in my family understands me. You are the only person, Michele, that gets me. And if you walk out that door, I've got no other reason to live. That is a form of manipulation.
Yeah. Been there, done that.
Yeah. So those are some signs.
And sometimes it can be so subtle. Sometimes they're not glaring. And I know of some people who, say for instance, the woman does make the money and the guy doesn't make as much money. He will still even try to monopolize her paycheck. It's going on this account. You still do not want, you still do not have access to it, even though you're the one bringing in the money. So I've seen all of those different things. Let's talk a little bit about the spiritual aspect. Because for me, my abuser used to beat me and wanted me to pray at the same time. So it wasn't just about, you can't go to church, but pray louder. And then the whole while, you're beating me in my back while I'm praying. You know what I mean? So people don't really know that there's a spiritual component to domestic violence. And so, you talked about, you're not giving money to the church, you're not paying tithe, or they want to see how much you're writing your tithe check for. Are you putting it in the basket, or you going to the pastor's office, like you said? So there are so many different things that attach themselves to it. And what about male privilege?
The male privilege, definitely. And one of the first clients that I worked with, this was back in 1997. And I was new to all of this, and I was a job coach. And so I was working with this young lady to help her to find a job. And she had married right out of high school. She was about 23 at the time, had 2 children under the age of 5. And because she had never worked outside of the home, she was finding it difficult to find employment. And so I asked her, I said, well, tell me about your support system. I said, would your mom watch the children? Because the only job offers that she had gotten were going to be in fast food and retail.
Right.
And of course, if you're the last hired, you get the bad shift, right? And so she said, okay, I'll go and I'm gonna ask my mom. She came back a few days later and she said, I think I'm just gonna go back home. And I said, so tell me a little bit more about that. She says, well, my mom says she's not gonna watch the children for me while I go to work. And here's the thing, the mom wasn't a bad mom. What the mom had told her, though, is that you need to return back home to your husband. He is a good provider. You live in a beautiful community in a 2-story brick home. You drive an SUV. He's got good benefits. That's just part of being a woman. It's part of being a wife. Learn not to make him angry. Because if you leave that house, another woman will be there. And that's male privilege, because it's not always the male abuser who reinforces that. Right. We as society reinforce that. Mm-hmm. How many times has a woman reached out for help? And if her husband is a man of means or, he's providing, the first thing she's going to be told is that, girl, everybody looking for a good man to take care of them. You need to stay right where you are. That is society reinforcing male privilege. And then when the man is reinforcing that, many times, especially within the Christian environment, that wonderful passage from Ephesians 5, talking about that God does not want divorce. The man is the head of the house. And I believe that the man is the head of the house. However, the way that I have met that when I've had clients who have said, I don't want to be in violation of scripture, what I ask them, and even not just those who are of Christian faith, but Muslim, Buddhist, that because any faith can reinforce male privilege. What I will ask that woman is, tell me, the God that you are serving, would the God you serve call you a bee? Would the God you serve call you out of your name? Would the God you serve threaten to take your children away? Would the God you serve stand in your way of getting more education? Would the God you serve, throw things at you? Right. And if they listen, that they're saying no, then I'm saying that, is that truly the person that you should be submitting to? Because that person that you're submitting to is also submitting to Christ within the Christian world. And if he is submitting to Christ, he will have Christ-like attributes. So I am submitting to the Christ in him.
Right. And Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. And so if this abuse is outside of the command or the standards of God, I'm not following you, because you're the Bible says that, to live with the woman according to knowledge, and to do benevolence unto her. And being abusive is not scriptural. And so when people always talk about, Ephesians 5, wives should submit unto, I said, you're forgetting the scripture that says, submit yourselves one to another.
Exactly.
Where does that scripture come into play? Right. I said, so people will try to manipulate the word, whether it's in an abusive relationship or not, but they would try to manipulate the word to suit their situation.
Most definitely.
So it's just amazing how people will take word out of context. And I really like how you said, would your God allow this? Would your God allow that? And I think when you lay it in their lap and give them the opportunity to really ponder that thing, to really say, you know what? No, my God wouldn't. So ask yourself the question. I'm not going to, because, as counselors, we don't dump on people, but we give them thought-provoking situations.
Exactly. and that's an important point to make, Michele. Here's the thing, especially when I'm doing training with caseworkers and other service providers, I think many times that people, and especially outside of domestic violence advocates, such as in healthcare, social services, that people are reluctant to even broach the conversation around domestic violence when they think someone may be in an abusive relationship, because they think that it's their job to save the person. It is not our job to save those who are in abusive relationships. It is our job to educate and to provide referrals and to provide tools. And that's part of, that whole line of questioning with the God you serve. Do these types of things to you, because then they can begin to have thoughts, that they come to that decision that, wait a minute, the God that I love and serve would never say these things to me. The God that I love and serve would never do these things to me. And so they are making a decision. And even when we are explaining and teaching the power and control wheel, that awareness comes up for her or him, that you mean it's not okay that I don't know how much money is in the bank account. You mean it's not okay that my partner is always threatening to take the children? They come to the conclusion on their own. I never tell someone you are in an abusive relationship. I give them the information, and then you can start seeing the wheels turn. They're like, oh my God.
They have these conversations in their head and like, wait a minute.
Exactly. Because it's never our place to tell someone they're being abused. It's our place to provide the education.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody says, explain the cycle of violence in an abusive relationship.
So when we talk about the cycle of violence, there's what they call the tension building stage. And I'm going to encourage everyone who's watching that you can simply just do a Google on power and control wheel. There's like a plethora of them out there. Just download it. Mm-hmm. But everything that happens in that power and control wheel, in my opinion, and when I'm training, I'm saying that that's part of that tension building when you are afraid to make a choice between cooking chicken and cooking shrimp because you don't know what your partner's response is going to be to it. If you are afraid to say, no, we can't have sex tonight because I still haven't gone for my 6-week checkup and the baby's only 2 weeks old. That's part of that tension building where the person is constantly walking in fear. And you having done this work, you know that many times what survivors will say is that I felt as though I was walking on eggshells. So that terminology comes directly from those who have survived it. So that's that tension building. And then we move into the actual battering stage. And that's usually when the actual physical assaults will happen, or also sexual assaults. And we haven't talked a lot about sexual assault within the context of intimate relationships. So sexual assaults are going to happen during that part. And then we move into the honeymoon. And I sometimes describe this. I can't remember the group who sung the song, but there was this song back in the day, when we going to get to the good part, when we going to get to the good part. And that's what the survivor is waiting on. When am I going to get back to that person that I met a year ago? When am I going to get back to that person I met 20 years ago? So during that honeymoon stage, quote unquote, there is remorse. The abuser is saying, oh, baby, I'm so sorry. You know what? In fact, I'm going to start going to church with you. I asked the pastor about us doing couples counseling. And you know what? As soon as this COVID-19 is over with, girl, I'm going to take you to Hawaii. Yeah. And you know what? Let's go ahead and have a big get together and invite your parents over for Thanksgiving. Everything that the survivor wants. Yeah. And here's the thing is that honeymoon stage, it could last for a day. It could last up to 2 years.
Yeah.
However, without intervention, 2 years later, all of a sudden you're getting dressed for work and you're trying on a new lipstick. What's that new lipstick? You ain't ever wore that before. You've been dressing different. And the cycle starts over again.
Absolutely. And so and in the class that I teach, I also, I add in the standover phase and, all of those different things. And I tell them, I said, just like you said, you don't know how tight the coil is. So your honeymoon phase may be a month, 2 months, 2 years. The tension phase may be a whole week. The explosion phase he may be raping you 3 times a day, and so the more control he wants, well, I say he because, that's, pretty much who it is, even though there are women, the coil can get tighter and those episodes can come more quickly. So you can go through the honeymoon, the standover, the tension and the explosion phase all in one day.
Right.
Or all in 1 week, depending on how tightly coiled that cycle is. And so, and that's when you have those questions that you ask the person, when was the last time you felt unsafe? Because I don't ever say, when was the last time you were abused?
Right.
So when was the last time you didn't feel comfortable in your own home? When was the last time you felt like you were violated in any type of way, whether it was mentally, so that line of questioning is very, very important.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of people, again, particularly the victim, she doesn't recognize that it's really abuse when they have those long honeymoon periods and there's kissing, the hugging, the gifts, the flowers, the regular love making and not the sexual assault. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to teach them the difference between, and some of them know it, but they don't know how to say that you're violating my body. You know what I mean? This is my personal space. And so, because my abuser used to sexually assault me, used to rape me all the time. And that was very difficult for me to conceptualize. I'm like, what in the world is going on here? But getting past that, it took me a minute to even think about, after all it was said and done, to even think about, the sexual aspect of relationships. I'm like, I ain't doing it. I don't want to do it. I don't need it. And so we have to think about the long-term implications, or, what happens in these relationships. I'm sorry, somebody's asking a question. I'm gonna get back to that. They were asking, can you talk about women who are abusive?
So when it comes to women who are abusive, the same power and control. A woman can be verbally and emotionally abusive. You call yourself a man. You better be glad I'm married to you. Here I am, 5'9", and you all are 5 feet tall. Please.
Okay.
So the same things that happen with a male, those same dynamics are the same. Now, here's something. This is a personal opinion of mine. I believe that the majority of the abuse that happens when women are the perpetrators are going to be those things that happen in that power and control will. Mm-hmm. It may not be as much as the physical. Can it be physical? Most definitely. However, for me, I look at the devastation of men's violence against women. Here in Texas in 2018, there were 174 women who were killed by a boyfriend or husband. 174. Over 250 children were left without a mother. The Texas Council on Family Violence just started in 2018 taking the reports of men who were killed in their relationships, and it was 32 men in 2018. And when you look at the physical violence, so I believe that whether it is a woman or a man who is the abuser, that those non-physical things are the same. However, when it comes to physical violence, it is women who really, really are impacted by the physical violence. What we know is that three women every single day die at the hands of a husband or boyfriend.
Wow.
3 women every day.
That's alarming.
And that's just an approximation. Mm-hmm. That's an approximation. We don't hear those same figures. One of my mentees who's in Tobago, and we did an online event last night. She had sent me information about a murder that occurred on Monday of this past week. Woman left her partner. He decapitated her. And again, also this week, the woman who was stomped to death. So I think the physical violence, when it is a male abuser, is so much more impactful. However, here's the other part of that, recognizing whether it is a male abuser or a female abuser, I believe that the long-term impact of the emotional trauma is the same. It is the same, because when we talk about trauma, we have to look at the event, what actually happened. And then what was the experience as a result of that? And then the long-term effects. So whether you are male or female, when you are constantly living in a relationship of turmoil, where you're constantly being denigrated, where there is fear of losing your children. Some people talk about parent alienation. If you are being financially abused, if your partner is constantly telling you that if you leave me, I'm going to kill you, or you're constantly having to rescue them because they actually have tried to commit suicide, those events then produce an experience. And sometimes that experience is an experience of guilt, that if I leave my partner, what will happen to them? That experience might be that, no one else is really going to want me. And so those long-term effects can turn into lowered self-esteem, lowered self-confidence, and also lowered help-seeking behavior.
Yeah.
People always say, well, why didn't she or why didn't he ask for help? As a result of the trauma, many times the victims will stop seeking for help because they start to believe, the abuser, that no one's going to help me, no one loves me, and that the abuser is the only person who's there for me.
This is all I've got. This is all I know, particularly if you've been in there for a long time. And, when I'm teaching and I'm talking about, Stockholm syndrome, you think about the people who started this when they were young, and then, maybe they were a teenager, and then now they're still with their abuser and they're in their 30s. And so that's the only love they've ever known. And so that codependence becomes, a crutch. It becomes, cemented in their mind, in their thought process, and believing, I don't need help. I don't want help. As long as I can get up and wash my face and, the bruises are going to heal. They make excuses for the event, for the experience, and for the perpetrator.
Exactly.
You know, someone says, when is the right time to leave, especially when the abusive person is trying to get lethal? That's heavy.
So
That's
here's
heavy.
the thing. At the end of the day, it's going to be up to the victim survivor. I prefer to say survivor.
Survivor.
It's up to them
Mhm.
when they decide to leave. Definitely when it has gotten to the point, and so I'm going to give you, there's something called a danger assessment, and that's a tool that we use, and it was actually created by a nurse. And there's like 20 questions, but 5 or 6 of them stand out for me. So again, it's always going to be up to the survivor when they choose to leave. However,
Yeah.
when we're doing an assessment of the relationship, these are questions that we ask. And these are all questions based on the abuser's behavior. And again, I want to be very clear. We put a lot of onus on survivors in relationships. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? We need to
Right.
start talking to the abusers, okay? I want to be extremely clear about that
Come on,
because
ma'am.
the abusers are driving this crime. And it is a crime. The abusers drive this crime. And so here are about 5 to 6 questions that we ask survivors about about the abuser. I'm not going to say their abuser, the abuser's behavior. And so these are questions, and we want them to look back for the last 12 months. So today is October 4th. So we'll say from October 4th of 2019 to October 4th today, 2020. In that past 12 months, have you left the abuser? Well, that's important because what we know is that each time she or he leaves the abuser, that increases the abuser's jealousy and need for control, because they're thinking that if you weren't with me, who were you with? Maybe you went back to your ex, maybe you found a new, whatever the case may be. And so that increases lethality for the survivor because now the abuser is more jealous. So separation can increase the risk of you being killed. And all these questions indicate the higher the risk of the survivor being killed. Second question that we ask is, are you pregnant? Well, again, case in point, the woman who was stomped to death by her husband this week was pregnant. About a few months ago here in Houston, a woman was stabbed multiple times. She was pregnant. I did a program yesterday, and it was the mother who is raising her granddaughter. Her daughter tried to leave, 19 years old. He killed her.
Yeah.
So when a woman is pregnant, even though this should be the most joyous time of her life in her relationship, it is the most dangerous time if she is in an abusive relationship. So, yes, you may want to consider leaving if you found out that you are pregnant. Third question that you want to ask is, has your partner evaded arrest? So, why is this important? Well, if I call 911, by the time law enforcement gets there and the abuser is gone, what the abuser becomes is more emboldened that you can call 911 if you want to. Popo not coming for about probably an hour. I will be long gone. And on top of that, I'm going to bail out of jail and I'm coming back for you.
And I'm coming back. Absolutely.
So if the partner has not been arrested, that increases your lethality if you're in an abusive relationship. Something else that increases your lethality. So one of the other questions we will ask is, has your partner ever threatened to kill you? The fact that someone has threatened, and then we go a step further, and this is based on the work both of Jacqueline Campbell and also Barbara Hart. That is one thing for an abuser to say that I'm going to kill you, but when they go forward and say, and this is how I'm going to do it. And I've had several clients share with me, their partners have told them exactly how they were going to do it. That is a red flag. Get out. And then another question that's extremely important is, has your partner strangled you? Not choked. We do not use the word choke. Here in Texas, and especially here in Harris County and Houston, we have been doing some extensive training. There is a company called McKay Consulting, Kelsey McKay. She's actually internationally known. She's a former attorney. And for about the last few years, she's been traveling all around the country doing training with law enforcement and healthcare providers about using the strangulation supplement. And what we know is that when someone has been strangled, they're about 7 times more likely to be a homicide victim. So asking the person, has your partner strangled you? Not choked you. Choking is what happens when I get ready to get off this live with you and go eat my chicken and I'm eating it too fast. Okay. Strangulation is when someone impedes my ability to breathe. And what that may look like, they may put both hands around my neck. They could put one hand and put me up against the wall. They could have me against the wall with their forearm underneath my neck. They could lay on top of me. And if they weigh more than me, their structure is bigger than mine, or when I scream and they put their hand over my mouth, all of those are forms of impeding breath and a form of strangulation and a third-degree felony here in the state of Texas. Not sure what it is across the other states, but here in Texas, it is a third-degree felony. And so if someone responds and says, yes, my partner strangled me, we really want to get them out or encourage them to get out. And so when we do this assessment and we give the person the score, then they are able to make that decision. And I can tell you that it works because I've done assessments and I've had women who came in, and I don't want to say they were nonchalant, but this was part of the cycle. They had left, and what we know is the average woman will leave and return to their abuser about 7 to 11 times. So here's the thing. She's sitting in front of me, but as I ask her these questions, I have seen women break down and cry and go, oh my God, he's going to kill me. Because as they answer these questions, they realize that the abuser's behavior is becoming more and more controlling. And the more controlling it becomes, the more lethal. So again, it is up to the survivor to make the choice. But so many times people have gone numb. I do an exercise, and we don't have the time for me to go through that exercise now. But at the end of the exercise, what overwhelmingly, probably 80 to 95% of the people in the room will tell me is that I went numb. I have them do the specific exercise. And that's the same thing I've heard from women for 24 years, is that they say, Miss Jenkins, pretty much nothing he does or says to me anymore bothers me. I stopped feeling a long time ago. And what these questions do is that they begin to take the Band-Aids off and expose the wounds, the events, and they get to live the experience. And that helps them to make that decision. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And that's good. I'm glad that you said that we don't tell them to leave. Somebody said, get out. It's easier said than done. And like you said, the lethality goes up with every attempt to leave because of all of the things that you've mentioned. And so when I'm talking to someone, counseling someone, or I teach my students, I said, you have to get her to make the decision. And once she's made the decision, then you become a catalyst for a safety plan. What does your house look like? What are your ways of getting out? If you're in the kitchen, is there an escape route through the window? Is there escape through another door in the kitchen? All of these different things. But at the same time, we have to tell them that we can only give you the resources, but you have to have the wherewithal. Because with me, I was choked. To the point I saw white. I really thought I was gone. I was hung out of an 11-story window with a knife to my throat, and he would always say, if you leave me, I'm going to kill you. And I was like, okay, what in the world? What did I do? My questions were, what did I do for him to, hate me so much or whatever? And this was a husband, this was a spouse. And so nobody was there to tell me to leave because I was in the isolation. I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody, couldn't go anywhere, all those different things. And so when I think about, someone being in the midst of a situation and you're finally giving them this aha moment, let's talk about safety planning. Let's talk about what that looks like, because a lot of people don't know. For me, when I finally got the mindset to leave, I didn't leave yet, but every time I washed clothes, I was putting clothes in a bag behind the dryer, 3 rows back.
You were safety planning.
So that I would, and I was like, I didn't know at the time that's what I was doing, but now that and so I had to have a go bag. A young lady I was counseling, she had 5 kids. She knew he had a gun in the house, even though she was very flippant. Oh, he ain't gonna do nothing. I said, girl, I need you to stop that. Create yourself a go bag for you and each one of your 5 kids. Store it at your neighbor's house. Store it on your job. But I said, you can't keep talking to him like that. And so one day we finally came up with a plan. And she says she goes to church on Wednesdays for Bible study. I said, okay, does your husband go with you? She said, no, he never goes to church. I said, this is your opportunity. Right. If in fact you're serious, this is your opportunity. I said, have you created your go bag? She said, well, I put a little thing. So the plan was she'd go to church like she was supposed to, but she never goes, and she just keeps going. And she was to drive to family in Ohio or whatever. But I never heard from her again. And that's been what is this, October? It had to have been January, December, January timeframe. And I've not heard from her. Her number doesn't work anymore. So I can't even check to see if she's okay. So walk us through some safety planning tips for the victim or survivor. And then also if any of us, loved ones can help with the safety planning process.
Well, what you just talked about definitely is a part of safety planning. And, when you said that you were putting aside clothing and talking to survivors, here's the thing. Survivors, they are amazing, and they do safety plan. They safety plan every day. They safety plan when they are deciding between cooking the chicken and the shrimp. Okay. Because they're able to look forward and say, okay, what was my partner's behavior like this morning when they woke up? So they're safety planning every day. They're safety planning. And so definitely putting aside, quote unquote, a go bag, having, clothing that you can just have, a favorite stuffed animal of the children or whatever, that the kiddos like. Here are other things to be thinking about, though. If you are dealing with a chronic illness, and again, everything is about power and control. And we're talking about violence that is happening between people who are intimate and know all the details about each other. And usually the abuser probably knows more details about the survivor because they're always keeping their eye on them. So here's other things to be concerned about. So if you have a chronic illness that, if you leave your partner, guess what? They know that on the first of each month, you have the first Monday, you go to your whatever type of doctor. You may want to talk to your doctor and say, can I start having my appointments on the second Thursday at 10 o'clock? So switch it up, because guess what? When you leave your partner, they're going to be there on that first Monday at 8 o'clock because they know that's where you're going to show up. So changing up how you get your medical care. If you're getting your prescriptions at the CVS on Wood Forest, now have your doctor to send it to the CVS on Main Street, because guess what? When you go to pick up that prescription or Walgreens, the whole point is that your partner knows your daily schedule. So when we're safety planning, when I'm talking to someone, I'm asking them to go through your entire day, go through your entire month, and begin to think, how can you switch things around? If you're working at an organization that is large enough, when I go in and I do training in corporate, we talk about that if they have multiple locations, that if I work at A location, then let's see about getting a transfer to C location. And it may just be 10 miles away. But unfortunately, like the young woman who was gunned down at the bank by her husband, maybe, in another scenario, maybe she'd been working with an advocate or law enforcement, that if there had been another branch of that bank, she could have been transferred there and he never would have gotten her that morning. We don't know. But those are things to think about. Thinking about your job status, thinking about the money situation, making sure that you're putting money aside, maybe having people to send you money and have everybody's got a Cash App now. That may be something you want to do, is say, okay, I've got this Cash App and I need you to send me money to this. So maybe you have family and friends that are out of state, and if each person can get enough to maybe get you $1,000 so that you're able to maybe get a place to stay. And then part of that safety plan is knowing where to call. And so I want to just give a basic number that anyone can call in the United States, and that's the National Domestic Violence Hotline. National Domestic Violence Hotline. And that number is 1-800-799-SAFE. 1-800-799-SAFE. And that's 7233. And so someone may be in New York City and they've got family and friends in El Campo, Texas. And so they could call that 1-800 number and say, you know what, I'm trying to leave my relationship. I have family and friends in El Campo. And what will happen is that they will be given a list of all of the domestic violence crisis centers in El Campo. Okay. So what I'm saying is that no matter where you are, you can get services. So you want to call that main number. Having an understanding of, other resources that are available, here in Texas, and I believe all across the US, we have something that's called crime victims compensation. crime victims compensation. And so no matter what state you're living in, I would encourage you to Google that, crime victims compensation. And that is a fund that is set up through the state that if you are a victim of a crime, and it's any crime, however, within the context of this conversation, we're talking about domestic violence. So let's say that I'm in an abusive relationship, and as a result of that abusive relationship, maybe I suffered, my partner maybe threw something at me and it knocked my eye out of its socket. So I go to the emergency room, and maybe I have health insurance. So health insurance is going to pay 80%. And for keep the numbers really small for me, the bill was $1,000. We know it'd probably be more than that, but $1,000. So I know that my insurance is going to pay $800, but there's a $200 that I have to pay. Well, if you are working with law enforcement, you file for crime victims compensation, what will happen is that all of those medical bills will be sent to your state. And you can get, even though you may have to come up with how to pay that $200, you get that $200 back. So crime victims compensation can do that. Also, crime victims compensation, unfortunately, if someone is killed, and again, 3 women are killed every single day. So this is for family members, and this moves past safety planning. But if you have a loved one who is killed as a result of domestic violence or any crime, crime victims compensation will pay for the funeral. Okay, so just that, and we just want to know that because I see so many people on my timeline who are doing GoFundMe's in the aftermath of a murder based on crime. The state can help with that. The state can help with that. However, going back to safety planning and leaving and knowing your resources, crime victims comp, if you are testifying in the case and maybe you don't have time off from work, it will pay, I believe, up to 1/3 of your salary. It can pay for childcare while you're in court. It also pays for counseling. And counseling should be a part of the safety plan, that once you've left the abuser, is that people need to get counseling. And I know that sometimes in certain communities there is resistance. However, recognizing that trauma is based on the event, the experience, and the long-term effect. And the long-term effect, and I saw here in the chat about post-traumatic stress disorder, it's real.
Yeah, it is.
Real. And so being able to get the counseling, so crime victims comp will pay for the counseling. Now, of course, all the domestic violence crisis centers, they also provide that counseling as well, and usually at no charge or on a sliding scale. If you have children that are in school, communicating with the school. Now, here's the thing, is that if the children are included in the order of protection, and that's a whole other thing, you could do an order of protection. However, keep in mind that it's a piece of paper, and there have been plenty of people who've been killed with a protective order. So that gets a little sketchy. However, it is a resource. It's a resource. However, communicating to the school and saying, you know what, I'm in the midst of a separation. My child is on the order of protection. The other parent is not allowed to take this child off campus. Or if you're afraid of that, then moving the child to a whole different school. That's part of the safety plan. That if you've moved to another neighborhood, then you move that child. And, there are some people who will talk about the whole parent alienation. However, here's the thing, is that based on that lethality assessment, that danger assessment, is that someone that you want to have your child, whether it's the male or the female, it does not matter. Exactly. But those are all things to be thinking about in a safety plan. And there's just a whole laundry list. And I know I'm going on and on. One final thing, and then I'm going to be quiet. There is, there's something we talk about as victim-defined safety planning. And some of the conversation is around, here's the reality. We know that most survivors in relationships are going to return. And if we go back to that power and control wheel, those are going to be some of the reasons. That if I have low self-esteem, low self-confidence, it's really hard for me to make it on my own. If I have never worked, and again, I've worked with clients who have never worked, or if I've got a sketchy job history, if I'm afraid of losing my children, there's many reasons that she or he will go back.
Right.
So many times they are going to choose to stay.
Yeah.
So then comes, how do I safety plan in the midst of this relationship? And I believe that's something that victim advocates, law enforcement, and other helpers in the arena have to be willing to work with the survivor on, is how do you stay safe in the relationship? Yeah, because unfortunately, for many, they may feel that is their only option.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, this has been amazing. We have about 5 minutes. Any final thoughts on how the community can become a part of this situation? We know living now in a pandemic that, domestic violence cases have gone up exponentially. People are in more harm. I mean, we're now at a better place where people can leave the house. But at the beginning of this pandemic, when we were on lockdown, the numbers went up, and we don't know who survived. We don't know who actually started becoming a victim at the time or what have you. What are what can the community do as a whole, in part, whatever, for the next 2 minutes or so? What can we do as a community to help those who are dealing with domestic violence?
I think we all have to be committed to realizing that it's everyone's problem. It's not just the
Yes.
problem of the couple that is happening to, that it is the teacher's issue. And so, as educators, being more educated about domestic violence and resources, we're not asking all these people to be advocates. We're just simply asking you to recognize, respond, and refer. I
Yes.
believe that pastors, and leaders in other faiths, that they have to begin to have a conversation about this across the pulpit or however the
Mhm.
lessons are taught. I believe that physicians and nurses, they need to be asking questions about relationships, and it's actually a requirement of JCO, Joint Accreditation of Commission on Hospital Organizations. So it's actually a requirement for hospitals that they have protocol in place. I believe that law enforcement, more training around domestic violence. I know that for many states it is a requirement based on the Violence Against Women Act, that law enforcement are getting training on domestic violence and the dynamics to help them to understand. So I believe that we all have to play an integral part. And
Yeah.
just as even individuals, as parents, sitting down and having a conversation with your young people,
Yeah.
as young as 8 and 9 years old, not about domestic violence per se, but if you see your child bullying somebody, if you see your child not being able to effectively communicate their needs and their wants, having conversations and teaching them how to do that, because those basic skills left unchecked can lead to abusive behavior later on.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, talking about self-love and self-care to even the youngest of child could help save somebody 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. This
Yeah.
has been such a rich, rich, rich conversation. I wish we could keep going on and on and on, because it's an exhaustive conversation. It's not something
Mm.
that goes away. It's not something that changes. And even though um, we make people aware of it in October, it's an ongoing thing. It's an everyday thing. Like you said, 3 women a day die, from at the hand of their abuser. And so it's everybody's problem. And I think we all need to become a little more sensitive to things that we see and not turn a blinded eye. Thank you again, my friend, Miss Thecia, for
You
coming
know,
on and talking about this very critical and important topic. For those of you who are out there, if you want to catch the replay, you can go to my YouTube channel at Life Matters with Michele TV official. That's Life Matters Life Matters with Michele TV official. Don't forget to go out. All of the shows are put out there for you to watch. And then also you can listen to it on Fridays at 4 o'clock on sensationalsoundsradio.net. And certainly, if you want to be a guest on the show, just go to my website at www.im-mij.com. Thank you again, my friend, for coming on the show.
thank you.
And I just want to tell everybody, thank you for tuning in. I am Michele Irby Johnson, your host. And remember, we talk about what matters to you in your life. You all have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.